There's a noise.
Yeah, like squeaking rats.
That's us.
We are live. We are live.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Good evening, viewers. A very good evening to all of you.
Good evening. Good
Creative
evening.
nonfiction is gaining ground in the world of literature. Yet we find many Indian upcoming writers are more inclined to writing stories, where imagination gets an upper hand over facts. Friends, how do we build a more concrete understanding of our human ancestry? Esoteric ecosystem, about the strange landscapes, how to know about the variegated facts about evolution of man and universe, about the diverse cultures and customs, the age of science, about human morals and values, life of great men, scientists and martyrs, how to be a winner, what is the secret of leadership, how to boost the immune system, why we fail, how organizations work, how to write a proposal, how to transform our thinking, and of books, people, and places. It is only through exposure to such materials we can enlighten us. At the same time, writing the facts of life or informative writing shows responsibility towards the readers of all ages. Today's children are more drawn towards the facts of life than the illusory fairy world. Asian Literary Society, with a view to open up the domain of creative nonfiction, organizes an online panel discussion on realism over imagination, creative nonfiction. We have in our panel distinguished authors. I would introduce you to all of them. Mr. Amit Dasgupta served the Indian Foreign Service for 34 years. He has a BCom degree from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, an MA and MPhil in Sociology from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and a 2-year attachment with the Department of Sociology in the University of McGill in Canada. He was the recipient of the National Merit Scholarship and the Commonwealth Fellowship and has attended an EDP at the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. During his diplomatic career, Amit served inter alia as Director Finance, Deputy Director General Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and Joint Secretary Public Diplomacy at the Ministry of External Affairs. He was first Secretary Political at the Embassy in Brussels, Director Economic and Head of the Office of the SARC, Secretary General in Kathmandu, Deputy Ambassador in Berlin, Consul General in Sydney, and Ambassador in the Philippines, with concurrent accreditation to the republics of Palau, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. After being superannuated from the Philippines in October 2013 as ambassador, Mr. Dasgupta took to full-time writing. He was the inaugural head of Mumbai campus of the internationally ranked S.P. Jain School of Global Management for 14 months. In 2016, he joined as the inaugural India country director of the internationally ranked University of New South Wales, Sydney. He was an appointed distinguished fellow of the Australia-India Institute and is also fellow of the Society of Policy Studies, India. Mr. Dasgupta is an eminent writer of both fiction and non-fiction. Some of his fiction books are The House and Other Stories, Telling Tales, Children's Literature in India, The Lost Fragrance, In the Land of the Blue Jasmine, The Phoenix Rises, Lockdown Memoirs, Indian by Choice, which is a graphic novel, A Quiet Noise, which is soon going to be published, and non-fiction books like Wisdom Tree, India for a Billion Reasons, creative non-fiction books like Lessons from Ruslana, In Search of Transformative Thinking, published by HarperCollins, Why We Fail, which is soon going to be published. Amit Dasgupta also published extensively on foreign and security policy and on development and management related themes, and over the past few years on India's higher education challenges. Some of these books are Strategic Shape of the World, The Divine Peacock, Understanding Contemporary India, The Perennial Tree, SARC means business, Salvaging the WTO, Doha and Beyond, and many others. Welcome on our panel, Mr. Dasgupta. Our second panelist is Mr. Sridhar Balan. Sridhar Balan is a senior professional in the publishing industry and has worked with Oxford University Press and Ratna Sagar Publishers. A literary writer, he has been a columnist in the Hindu and the Economic Times, the Financial Express, and the Indian Express. He has currently been writing a column in the Asian Age, which will resume once the current pandemic is over. His columns have been widely appreciated and cover books, literary history, and aspects of publishing. His book, Off the Shelf, on books, book, people, and places, was published by Speaking Tiger, Delhi, in November 2019. Widely reviewed in the media, it has been described as a delightful roller coaster ride through the checkered history of publishing and as a book lover's testament to the greatness of books. Welcome on the panel, Mr. Balan.
Thank you.
Our next panelist, Mr. Vasudev Murthy, is a visiting professor at a number of top management schools where he teaches consulting, communication, and leadership. He runs Focal Concepts, a consulting firm in Bangalore that specializes in communication, leadership workshops, and strategic initiatives. He teaches classical music, violin, and vocal, and is a yoga and animal welfare enthusiast. He is the author of a number of books. What the Rags Told Me is a novel about classical music. The Time Merchants, there are 30 short stories. There are two books on Sherlock Holmes in Japan, published by HarperCollins, and Sherlock Holmes in Timbuktu, published by Poison Pen Press. There's another book, The Ramgarh Lit Fest, published by HarperCollins. His nonfiction work weaves in creative forays into fiction to make a point. Some of his nonfiction books are Effective Proposal Writing and How Organizations Really Work. Welcome on our panel, Mr. Murti. Our next panelist is Mr. Iyer. Mr. Prakash Iyer is a former CEO turned best-selling author and motivational speaker. He is a certified leadership coach and an uncertified cricket junkie. After spending nearly 3 decades in the corporate world, Prakash chose to step out to pursue his passion. In his last role, he was the managing director of Kimberley Clark Liver in India. Earlier roles include managing director and CEO of the Infomedia India Limited, formerly Tata Infomedia, and prior to that, executive director at PepsiCo. Prakash is an independent director on the board of Xerox India, an advisor to the Multiples Private Equity Fund, and also served as the CEO of the Mumbai Indian Cricket franchise in their IPL title-winning campaign in 2015. Passionate about cricket and people, Prakash speaks and writes extensively on motivation, leadership, teamwork, and winning. He writes to awaken, inspire, and unleash the leader winner. His first book, titled The Habit of Winning, was published by Penguin in 2011. It was shortlisted for the Economic Crossword Popular Book Award and has been translated into 7 languages. It is a book that will change the way you think, work, and live, with stories about self-belief and perseverance, leadership, and teamwork. Stories that will ignite a new passion and a renewed sense of purpose in your mind. His second book talks about the fact that leaders are like tea bags. Only when you put them in hot water do you know how strong they really are. Well, The Sacrifice of Leadership was published in 2013, and the book is You Too Can. It's published in 2017. He says that success leaves tracks. Whether you are an entrepreneur or an employee, a housewife or a student, here's your chance to learn from men and women who unleashed the entrepreneur within them. All three books are national bestsellers. Welcome on the forum, Mr. Iyer. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
To start our discussion, my first question
Thank
to
you.
Mr. Amit Dasgupta. Sir, your writings, is there a noise?
Yeah, there's a noise.
Okay.
No. Yep.
My first question is to Mr. Dasgupta. Sir, your writings reflect on your philosophical and sociological ideas. How do you define creative nonfiction in the context of your writing? Lessons from Ruslana in search of transformative thinking, and another novel which is soon going to be published, Why We Fail.
So, I mean, let me just start off by saying that I'm not entirely convinced that when we write, there is a distinction between what is considered to be imagination or fiction and what is considered to be fact or reality. I believe to a large extent, every author, even if they're writing a novel, draw heavily from reality, from their immediate surroundings, from the impacts that they have had over the years, the influences that shaped their mind. They could be good, they could be bad influences, they could be tragedies, but all of this combines together to create a story. And quite frankly, if you take a walk and to the market, every individual that you see carries multiple stories within himself or herself. Let me talk about lessons for Ruslana and also another book that I'm working on, which is a fiction title called A Quiet Noise. Now, in lessons for Ruslana, by the way, existed. She was a model, and at the age of 19, she sent a photograph of herself to a friend of hers who was in New York. That friend showed it around, and that friend was a model, showed it around to managers and other people. And Ruslana was brought to New York and became a very famous model, became the face of Vogue, so to speak. And it was a meteoric rise, but at the age of 21, Ruslana committed suicide. And her last blog was, "Who am I? Will I ever find myself?" And taking that as a basic theme, and this is a true story. You can Google Ruslana. Taking that as I wanted to explore a basic question, which I suppose has philosophically bothered all of us: Who are we? And I argue that there is a big difference, or a distinction, if you like, between who we are and who we appear to be. And navigating this two extremes becomes a very big challenge for us. And in A Quiet Noise, which is a work in progress, I argue that all of us have an inside and an outside. And that the balance of mind, if you like, is when we are able to navigate this inside and outside successfully. If we are not, there's going to be a conflict. It can lead to alienation, it can lead to all kinds of complications. In the case of Ruslana, she was not able to navigate the difference between who she perceived she was and who other people wanted her to actually be. And she felt distanced from that. And the way she negotiated it was to commit suicide. And, while A Quiet Noise is fiction, I think it draws from human experiences. I think it draws from fact and reality. And therefore, I would find it very difficult to say that reality and imagination should be kept as two separate compartments. So this would be my starting comment. I'm mindful we have an hour and we have some absolutely outstanding panelists, and I'd love to hear them.
Okay. Okay. My next question would be to Mr. Sridhar Balan. Sir, how do you categorize, how do you categorize your book, off the shelf on books, book, people, and places? It is, I believe, a form of transmission that you aim for the future generations in order to inculcate the habit of reading. So, is it a non-fiction book? How do you categorize your book, sir?
Thank you, Bishakha, and thank you to ALS for having me on the panel. Let me say, I think my book, Off the Shelf, on books, book people and places, to make a claim that it is for future generations is rather lofty. It's a, shall I say, a very humble contribution. It's basically a potpourri of essays, of anecdotes, of some amazing people in the book trade that I have met, because I have worked in publishing for a long time. And the book is structured, and of course also of places, and of course books, descriptions of books permeate the book throughout. But the book is structured in such a way that it's actually aimed at the reader. And I have tried to aim it at the general reader, and the book is structured in such a way that while it does follow a chronology, there is no strict linear progression, in the sense that a reader could dip into any chapter that he fancies or any story that he would like to follow up. Some of the stories are known, but some of them are unknown. And the idea is to create a pleasurable experience and so interest the reader that he or she might like to do their own follow-up, on some of these uh, anecdotes or some of the subjects that I have covered. I begin, after my introduction, amazing character called Dean Mohammed. He was a soldier in the East India Company. And he had an amazing career as an entrepreneur. He was the son of a barber in 18th century. He joined the East India Company as a boy. And after resigning from the East India Company, he traveled with his master, Mr. Baker, to Ireland and to England. And he had resolved very early that he would have nothing to do with his father's profession. Have it, he didn't quite become a barber, but he had to deal with human hair. And what he had to do was that he actually set up the first chain of shampooing parlors in England. And he became a shampooing surgeon with His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales as his patron. But even more important, when you go to London, at the corner of Charles Street, you see a plaque, and a blue plaque which says that here was the site for the Hindustani coffee house. And he set up a very famous coffee house there, where he served a variety of, Indian and Asian foods, along with exotic spirits. And he set up a hookah bar. The only thing that he did not serve was coffee. So actually, kind of stories can be, kind of multiplied and taken on. I have some amazing stories on Cobbett and, on Roy Hawkins and people like that. Even a concept like, two Supreme Court judges recently, when looking at the plight of the construction workers, migrant workers in the construction industry, they said, looking at their life reads like a Shakespearean tragedy. Now, I just wanted to remind, and I wrote an article on it to tell their lordships that the term Shakespearean tragedy would never have been known in history. Because when Shakespeare died in 1616, 18 of his plays died with him. And among those 18 plays were all of these Shakespeare tragedies. So we would never have known what a Shakespeare tragedy would have been, but for the work of two remarkable gentlemen called Henry Condell and James, who actually decided as a tribute to Shakespeare to actually compile all his plays. And 36 plays they compiled. They had no written manuscripts because Shakespeare actually never kept any of his notes. And they actually resurrected the plays because they were all Shakespeare actors along with Shakespeare. And then they recreated these 36 plays based on the dialogues that they had themselves enunciated. Now, what do we say? Do we know that those are the authentic lines that Shakespeare actually wrote? There is no one to say that. But what we have remarkable is the first folio published in 1623, which actually gives you all of Shakespeare's plays. Of course, he wrote a total of 37, but that is what is actually remarkable. So these are kind of amazing stories that they are, and I will take up some of them later in the panel discussion. And lastly, I would like to only conclude that I somewhat agree with what Amit said. The whole question of positing imagination versus reality or against reality, because I would like to put myself in the position of a reader. What is a reader without imagination? When you read a text, and if that text is devoid of illustrations, what is it that keeps your mind focused on that printed text? What sustains reading over a long period of time? It is imagination, because you need to visualize in your mind. You picture in your mind, the story as it unfolds while you're reading. And it is that imagination that sustains reading. Thank you.
Wonderful. My next question is to Mr. Vasudev Murthy. Sir, how would you like to define creative nonfiction in the context of your writing?
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me? Just confirming. Yeah. So those are very enlightening perspectives offered by Mr. Dasgupta and Mr. Balan. I think I've learned something during the course of their talk. I want to pick on one particular point Mr. Sridhar Balan said to help answer this question, which is we really have to keep the reader in mind. And today's reader, frankly, is completely different and is evolving very, very rapidly. And so the very question of creative nonfiction is, well, on the one hand, yes, it's an attempt to make something more accessible, but at the same time, now, I'll, in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about 3 books very quickly. I'm cognizant that we're short of time. We shouldn't take too much time here. One is a book of classical music that you're aware of, right? Now, on the one hand, who would be interested in reading a textbook of classical music? Very, very few people, if you ask me, right? And ironically, classical music is also a beautiful type of storytelling, right? If you look at a rag and deep into it, there's a lot of very beautiful stories that emerge by just listening to the exposition of any rag. So in the
internet challenge, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We can continue after he appears, but then we can continue with Mr. Iyer. Should we wait? I mean, let me put a question to Mr. Iyer.
Hello,
he's coming. Great.
I'm really sorry. I beg your pardon.
That's all right.
Yeah. So quickly about, I was talking about my book on classical music, and I'm not sure at what point I got disconnected. So I was just making a point that classical music as a subject, first of all, is almost by definition non-fiction. Yet it deals with emotions and things like that. So the exposition of any particular rag, for example, is a kind of beautiful storytelling. There's a lot of fiction in some sense. If you listen to, for example, Nikhil Banerjee or those kinds of brilliant artists, there's an extraordinary kind of subtle storytelling that's going on, which I don't know where to place it, frankly. That's one. So I think the endeavor ultimately is bringing so-called fairly dry subjects or arcane subjects closer to the reader in the manner that they prefer consuming it. So again, for example, proposal writing. I've written a book on proposal writing. Can there be a drier subject than that? I don't think so. Right? I mean, why would anybody actually waste good money in buying a book on proposal writing? So I have had to do certain specific things to make it very interesting. Hopefully, I don't know. And there have been cartoons and all kinds of stuff trying to bring life into a fairly grim area. And secondly, about how the other book that I have written about is about how organizations work. And here, all my distinguished colleagues here have spent a lot of time in the industry in different ways, and they know that truth or life is stranger than fiction. So actually, when you're trying to explain organizational theory or management concepts, so it is pretty easy actually to find remarkable stories that have actually bubbling up all around you to go ahead and explain a certain point. Otherwise, the fear, frankly, is that a person who takes up something which is forcibly called non-fiction will probably read 20 pages at a time, think about it, come back after a month, and so on. So our endeavor is to hook the reader, and through various kinds of devices like this, to make him continue the development. So I think I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Very inspiring. Mr. Iyer, is storytelling regarded as an important skill in the corporate world? Do you think storytelling is regarded as an important skill in the corporate world? And then you would say, what literary device do you use as a motivational writer?
So I'd like to suggest, Bishakha, that it's not just in the corporate world, but I think storytelling is a useful skill to have.
Okay.
Whether you're in the corporate world or you're a teacher in school or you're a grandmother trying to bring up a little kid, you still want to be a storyteller. And I think we've all grown up on stories. And I do think, therefore, that storytelling can be a fairly powerful tool when it comes to making impact, to communicating a point of view, to making sure that the point you want to make is understood and that it sticks in somebody's head. So yes, storytelling is important. I tell a lot of stories, and I guess it started early somewhere along the way where I found that, maybe I was selling soap very early in my life and I had a team with me, and I could have been out there telling them, come on guys, we've got to do it, or we've got to make it work. And I don't think it really stuck in people's heads. But if you told them a story, suddenly that message would get replayed and it would come back to you. And maybe you told them a story about something that happened in a very different world. And it could be, what did Sachin Tendulkar do there? But you'd find that a month later, somebody comes back and says, remember Sachin? And that's what we've done. So I think stories have this ability to get your point across and get people to start kind of getting the message and saying, hey, I need to do something about it. And that's what I try and do. I keep looking for stories, and I think stories are all around us. We only need to look. It's not as if you need to be at the feet of the master or to have this spiritual higher being to learn a story or to have read all the classics to get a story. Sometimes you'll find that lady selling vegetables outside your house, she's got an interesting story to tell, but you need to be listening to it. And I think I find stories all around with all the little things that happen in our world, and I try and share them with the view that, hey, maybe there is something we can all learn from it. And to paraphrase what has been said earlier by my colleagues on the panel, I think our challenge, whether you call it creative nonfiction or not, I think is to remember that we are not writing the terms and conditions in the guarantee of a microwave oven, because that's nonfiction and no one wants to read it. But your job is to say, how can you make a point which people want to read, which people want to say, wow, tell me more. I want to know more about what happened. And that, I guess, is what makes us all perhaps write what we do.
Yeah. So, what literary devices you use as a motivational writer when you write, uh, The Secret of Leadership, How to Win? I mean, are you plotting the stories talking about the lives of people?
So I guess I'm telling a lot of stories because, like I said, I believe that stories work. But these could be about people. So it could be lessons from, and I think you referred to it to say, hey, what can you learn from a tea bag about leadership? And I think, and maybe you suddenly realize that if you take something like a tea bag, and you suddenly say, wow, there's so much to learn from that damn tea bag. You know, including the fact that you must remember that no matter how good a tea bag you are, somebody else is holding the string. Maybe there's a lesson there for leaders. Maybe there's a lesson there for all of us from that little tea bag. But this could be as much about something that I might have learned in my life. So it could be something that happened with a colleague, with a boss, indeed with an interaction with my driver. I had a terrific guy who used to drive me around for many years, and I think I learned a lot of lessons from him. And what I try and do is to share lessons from him. So as much as Sachin Tendulkar can teach us all a few things about what it takes to be a winner, I think we can learn from other people. So I try and share those stories. But I think the other thing I try and do is to actually imagine. And when I wrote my first book, this is what I thought about. I was thinking, hey, here's my 19, if I'm talking to my 19-year-old child, what do I want them to know about what it takes to get it right? And what is it that we don't necessarily learn in school and college, which are perhaps essential life skills? And so that was the first bit. What can I tell them that will help them? But more important, how can I say it in a manner that they would want to listen? And therefore, I think the need to be careful that you're not trying to, kind of sermonize or tell them how much you know, or tell them how, hey, I learned all of this and look at me. I don't think any of that was the intent. The idea was to try and make it simple.
Yeah. Wonderful. I would then come to Mr. Dasgupta. Sir, how to strike a balance between facts and opinions while writing informative non-fiction pieces or essays? How should I strike a balance between facts and opinions? Because opinions sometimes become subjective.
Well, I think, if you're writing a book on a particular subject, your perspective is bound to come in. And if that perspective is an opinion, then it's going to come in. It's very difficult to keep opinion or personal perceptions about a situation away from it. Let's take a very crude example, an example of the Holocaust. And so we know that 6 million Jews, homosexuals, people who were elderly, people who were infirm, gypsies, they were killed in the concentration camps. Now, you can either put a factual enumeration of what happened, and so you can list out the number of concentration camps. You can say ABCD were all prisoners, and these are the people who died. That is a very powerful account, undoubtedly. But I believe that in the way you say something, your opinion or your perception is bound to creep in. And I don't think there's any need for us to be ashamed about it. I think it's important for us to recognize that the way my colleagues on the panel have made a series of really outstanding points, and 1 hour is not enough to flesh these out. But let me share an example. There's a book I'm very fond of. It's called Ways of Seeing, and it was made into a series of BBC films, and it's by a person called John Berger. And I'll take one example of his. Now, you and I all know that Van Gogh was a painter, that he was manic depressive. There are stories that he cut his ear off because the girl he was in love with apparently gave him the impression that she wasn't in love with him, and then he shot himself in a wheat field. Now, one of the very powerful paintings that he did is called Wheat Fields and Flying Crows. And John Berger says that this painting was there in the museum and the art gallery, and everyone was looking at it with great admiration. And you can Google and look at the painting, it's really powerful. And then John Berger goes up to the people viewing it, and without speaking to anyone in particular, he says, "Did you know that this was the last painting that Van Gogh did?" And the moment he said that, people started to look at that painting differently. You know, they saw the wheat fields, and there was a path cutting through the wheat fields. And somehow that path lost its way. It was as if you couldn't figure out where you wanted to go to. The sky was full of dark and gray clouds, and there were crows. The crows were harbingers of death. And everyone who looked at that painting said what Van Gogh was really trying to communicate through that painting was that he was going to commit suicide. And after all, he did shoot himself, and he did shoot himself in a wheat field. Berger tells us that the most fascinating thing about this is that at the time when Van Gogh painted Wheat Fields and Flying Crows, he was an extremely happy person. And after completing that painting, he wrote to his brother Theo and said, "I think I'm really happy with what I've just painted." The second point that Berger makes is that it wasn't his last painting. He did 8 more paintings after that. Now, what happens is a single piece of information can actually completely shift the way in which you see a situation. So when we talk about opinions and we talk about facts, I think it's important for us to perhaps modulate the word opinion and to say the way in which we perceive a situation, and then communicate it to the audience, to the reader. Because as Balan was saying, and which I think many other people picked up on, is that who are you writing for? I mean, I can sit down and write an essay and tear it up or leave it in my computer. But if I'm writing that essay or writing a book or whatever it is, and I want other people to read it, many of whom would be anonymous, I need to be able to relate to them. I need to be able to communicate to them. And what I want to communicate to them is my way of seeing. That's what I want to communicate. So let me just end by one more sentence. And there's this great story. I don't know how far it's true, but there's this great story about Pablo Picasso, who once asked a number of people, students and others, including those who were learning how to paint, when you see a bicycle, what do you see? And everyone said, we see motion, we see this, that, and the other. And Picasso said, I see the head of a bull. And he took the bicycle seat out, and he took the bicycle handles out. And he juxtaposed it in such a manner that anyone who sees a bicycle now sees the head of a bull. It's one of the world's. I think it's important for us to recognize that the way we see a problem can actually shift the way in which other people see a situation. I don't know if I made sense, but I'm happy to take questions.
No, wonderful. Achha, Mr. Balan is having a problem. Should I go to Mr. Murti? Sir, would you tell us how to write a proposal?
Okay. All right. Now we're getting into the area of business in that sense. And along the way, a lot of people have pointed out that we have to find innovative, interesting ways to get the attention of the reader. And I think that will never be it'll be a struggle that will happen throughout our writing careers and as technology takes over the way we interact with the world. I'm just making a point because as far as the proposal writing point is concerned, I suppose that's because of my book. It is again a piece of fairly dry information which supposedly tom-toms about how wonderful we are or how great we are, and we're trying to sell something, right? And if I remember correctly, Prakash also pointed out that people want stories. So storytelling is something that is everybody wants it. People really don't like facts and numbers beyond a point. I mean, it's important, but they would rather be taken into a make-believe world of some kind. If we as writers of what is otherwise considered fairly dry stuff like proposals, for example, if we are able to create those elements of creativity within proposals, then essentially we are selling a story, hopefully convincingly, which people buy. And that is actually what a proposal is evolving in today. In fact, I'm aware, because I'm in that particular circle, of a lot of very fantastic innovations which will probably be coming up very soon in terms of automation and all that. Never mind. The point is, again, a proposal is a document which sells a particular point of view. In fact, a proposal, even as somebody in the publishing industry, Mr. Balan, mentioned, if I were to approach a publisher today, I need to actually give a proposal for my book before I give the manuscript, right? Because I need to make the business case and so on. Nevertheless, the issue here is, in that proposal, I have to make it compelling, interesting reading. And the creative instinct comes to bear in so many ways as to why what we are proposed to do for you will actually make sense for you, and so on and so forth. So though a proposal prima facie sounds fairly, I mean, what could it be? It says this is a project, this is how we'll do it for you, and this is the amount we charge for you. Actually, the creative possibilities are tremendous out there. Given the fact that we know from data that only about 10% of all proposals, even less, are actually ever accepted by anybody, right? So therefore, the more creative that you can be by including colors, graphics, characters, case studies in the first person, all those kinds of literary devices, if we can insert those into proposals, frankly, you have a better chance to answer. Did I ramble on too much? I just, hopefully it was not too much.
No, but please tell us, like, when how to start. As for instance, should we start with a bang, like, come to the point, or should we first deal with the background? How to write?
Yes. Okay.
Something
So quickly, a proposal is divided into a number of different segments. One of the most critical segments is what is called the executive summary. Right? An executive summary, by definition, screams out to the executive. Let me take Prakash as an example. If I were to be writing a proposal to submit to Prakash, given his background as a CEO and so forth, he would want 2 or 3 pages of tight information which explains the background and exactly what we propose to do for him. So to answer your question, we need to demonstrate as soon as possible in the minimum amount of time how we propose to do something for him, whether we understood his particular area of pain, which we hope to then do that. So therefore, indeed, creative elements come in. Again, this is not an adequate time for this, but there's a lot of creativity involved in creating that very simple executive summary. Please keep in mind, today people's attention span is not more than 4.5 minutes max. Every second that they're actually reading your stuff is a bonus. You should be happy that they're actually reading the next page, because the possibilities of distractions are enormous. And especially in the cases of things where they're forced to read stuff like a proposal, you really have to work very, very hard to convince them, as I said, by creating the case that we really, truly understand what their situation is, rather than harp about how wonderful we are. I wonder if I answered that.
Wonderful. Mr. Sridhar Balan, sir, I would like to ask you that what is the role of creative nonfiction in print media? Because you were a literary columnist. Could you hear me, sir?
Yes.
What is the role of creative nonfiction?
I was in publishing, and before I really speak to you about experiences of publishing or printing, let me say I'm happy that previous speaker Vasudev mentioned that he was submitting a proposal only, to Prakash.
Yeah.
And he said, the contents have to be very packed. But he assumes that Prakash has an attention span of only 4.5. I am very happy that it is not the quality of leadership that requires to be tested, but you know how Prakash tests leadership. He wants to ask you whether you are prepared to be dipped in hot water, like a tea bag. And I think that is why we will never submit ourselves for an interview for any leadership position with Prakash. However, I would like to say, I would like to quote two examples. One from my book, which I will do later, but the one which is not in my book. In the I always believed. I mean, you mentioned earlier about writing. How dispassionate can you write? About life of scientists. Biographies. I always believe that there is a craft involved in biography writing. And all writing is a craft, but biography writing is a special craft because biographies of people they are in the public domain. I mean, anybody can write, another biography, explaining things in a different way, and which biography will get to be read most will depend on how you wrote it. I am reminded of a biography, I mean, many biographies of the famous scientist Stephen Hawking. One of them was by two authors called Gribbin and White. They were kind of called hack writers. And one of the incidents that they mentioned is a very curious and interesting incident, which many people may not know, but it actually deals with India. And they mentioned that while Hawkins was in Cambridge, our own scientist Jayant Narlikar was a contemporary. And they were friends. And Jayant was a research assistant to Fred Hoyle, who was the big name in physics and astronomy and theory of black holes and so on. Now it so happened that Fred was scheduled to give a major talk before the Royal Society, very prestigious talk, and he had asked Jayant to put together some of his research notes and other things. It was at that moment that Stephen Hawking tapped on Narlikar's door and came inside and said, "Jayant, what are you doing?" So Jayant said, "I'm just putting together these notes and, kind of quickly gathered them up and so on." I mean, they were going to be, given in a formal lecture, and he didn't want Hawkins to see that, but Hawking had seen. And later, when Hoyle gave this lecture, and because of his stature and so on, nobody would dare, kind of put a question and so on. But one hand shot up from the back row, very diminutive hand, and Hoyle said, "Yes." And Hawking got up and proceeded to demolish many of the kind of theories and so on. It was based on some material which, as far as Hoyle knew, only he and Jayant knew. So he went back and, obviously must have been upset. So Gribbin and White said that we are unable to record what punishment, if any, Hoyle meted out to Narlikar. Now, I happened to review that book for the Hindu. And I wrote to Jayant in Pune at the Center for Astrophysics. And I asked him, how much of this is fact and how much is fiction. And Narlikar, in a very, very, simple, nonchalant way, he said, "Mr. Balan, Gribbin and White have a habit of taking liberty with the truth. Liberty with the truth." That's what he said.
Yeah.
And later, I had occasion to look at Narlikar's own remarkable autobiography. It's called Adventures for Life in Four Cities. It was originally written in Marathi and then translated into English and published by NBT, where he also refers to this. But one of the other things that he does refer is that he beat Hawking in a table tennis match. And the headline, the review got headlined as Narlikar beats Hawking in TT. So, there are these kinds of interesting kind of anecdotes, but you should not embroider, facts in order to ensure a greater readability. or a greater kind of. Now, for example, the founder of Oxford University Press in India, on whom I have written a chapter, his name was E.V. Ryu, Emil Victor Ryu, and he studied at Oxford at Balliol, and he was a scholar of the classics, and he's famous for having translated Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad from Greek into Latin. But he joined Oxford University Press, and then he set up this office. And what is remarkable is that not only did he establish OUP successfully in Bombay, and then went back, and then he became an editor of the Penguin series. I mean, of the classics and so on. But what is not very well known, and which I have put down actually in my book, is that he was a wonderful writer of verse, of poetry. I was wondering how long it will take to get poetry featured in this panel, considering that you are a poet, and somehow or the other you have not steered people towards poetry. I wonder why. But in this, he has written a remarkable, he wrote on number of things, and one of the things that he actually wrote was on Hall and Night, a lovely poem on Hall and Night. For those of you, all of us would have done mathematics at some stage in school. But if you did algebra, your basic bugbear was the text and algebra text by Hall and Night. And there is a sneaking sympathy that, Ryu had for poor schoolboys in England who had to deal with this, complexities of the algebra by Hall and Night. Some version of this book is even used today. And this poem is so remarkable, the Hall and Night. And then, of course, he's also written a remarkable poem called The Unicorn. The unicorn is a kind of a symbol, it is, you have to allow your imaginative spirit to roam free, because the unicorn is an imaginary creature, and and unicorn has figured in mythology, and it's figured in Indian mythology too, Indian history too. In fact, there is a remarkable biography on the lesser known artist called Badri Narayan, written by Prema Vishwanathan for Mark, in which Badri, lamented that, the use of unicorn started, like India, but, it got kind of appropriated by Western symbolism. But one of the remarkable things in this poem called The Unicorn by Ryu, you can see how much he believes in, because when you imagine a unicorn, you also believe in the power of magic. And actually the unicorn, this poem, the reactions were that a lot of people said, we just looked closely and we just saw a unicorn. And I am taken back to the story by James Thurber in 1935. He wrote this remarkable story called The Unicorn in the Garden, where, the husband manages to, I may be forgiven for saying this, but the husband manages to turn the tables on the wife by pretending to have seen a unicorn. Now, Thurber was a remarkable writer, and, his stories have been made into films, Secret Life of Walter Mitty being one of them. So again, I'm coming back to that whole thing that about imagination and writing. But there is no doubt about it that it is the duty. In fact, I think when you write, as I said, keep the reader, but it's also important to, keep, stating facts. It should be, but the facts can be made. Facts can be made interesting. And you spoke about how do you start the story? You start with a punchline. I think the opening lines are very strong. Opening lines are very strong. They need to get you hooked. You're talking of 4.5 minutes attention span. Is it worthwhile for the reader to go through that whole story? You must get him hooked, And that, I think, opening statements are very important. Headings are very important. So these are the kinds of things that one would look for, even in publishing, How interesting have you made it? And that's important. Thank you.
Wonderful. Mr. Iyer, I would like to make a question, which is very academic, I believe. Like many times, authors write essays which look like an academic note. And hence lose the luster of a creative writing. And authors think that a write-up full of quotes can make it a fabulous literary piece. Could you provide us with some guidelines of writing an essay, as for instance?
I think it's important to recognize why are you writing that piece, and starting with that why, I think, is an important one. So it's not for me to dismiss the author who might have written an essay with lots of quotes and lots of references, and sometimes and sometimes the work you're doing, if it's meant for peer review in an academic journal, then you want to demonstrate a body of work that's gone in to create that essay, and therefore the research and stuff like that. But if you're looking at more popular nonfiction in the sense of saying, hey, you are writing because you want somebody else out there to read, then I think it's important to start with the reader. And maybe if nothing else in this hour that, if somebody's been listening to the four of us here or the five of us, I think that's a key message, which is start with your reader. Make sure that you've got your reader right up front and you're writing for her or for him and not for yourself. And I think don't try and make this something about you. So don't try and impress people. It's not about showing people who you are, how good you are, or how good your command of the language is. But it's about getting a point across in an interesting manner. I think therefore starting with the reader, making it simple. Don't try and impress. It's not about you. It's about ensuring that your message gets across. I think it's also important for us to recognize that the idea is not to draw attention to yourself. And, there's this remarkable gentleman called Amit Verma, a great podcaster, terrifically curious person, and who also teaches writing. And he talks about how it's a bit like a window and the window pane. So when you have a window, you don't want to attract attention to the pane. You want to make sure that people look at the window and look out and say, what a lovely view that is, rather than getting focused on the window pane. And I think maybe there's an interesting point there that when you're writing nonfiction, don't try and focus so much on the writing itself as much as saying, is the message getting across in an interesting way? Maybe that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, fantastic. Mr. Murti, would you like to say anything on this? On this point?
Would you like to rephrase which specific point?
I'm saying that many times authors write essays which look like an academic note, with full of quotes and verses, which doesn't look fabulous. But people think that probably quotes and verses and an essay would make it a good literary piece. How to write an essay, as for instance, anything about like Off the Truth or about the country, anything, So how to, or on women's issues, for instance. How to write it.
Okay, so I think the prior speakers have spoken extremely well. I don't know what else I can add to that. However, again, going back to the issue of the extraordinarily short span of attention we have, even to people listening to this particular debate, I can tell you, I'm sure, if we are not able to stick firmly to the point, people will move off. It's just the nature of today's reader or spectator of any event. Now, in terms of what you just said, academic writing and so on, when I teach business writing, let's say, to various organizations, they have the same problem. Everyone's in a hurry. Everyone's rushing from place to place. So this business of quotes and so on, I don't know if it's... there are certain new types of writing where the conventional ways in which you write an essay are being thrown out of the window. Okay, specifically, the way we develop an essay, for example, is look at the background, give some quotations, set the stage, blah blah blah. Then by the time we come to page 15 in a massive, exposition of our intelligence, we come with the conclusion. But today, as I said, people just don't have time. So therefore, there are new models. There's a particular model I just mentioned called Barbara Minto's pyramid principle, which basically says get to the point first, and then start expanding the other way. So I think the very way in which we write, the way in which we are going to be interacting with our readers is going to change drastically. It has already changed. If we haven't kept up with the story, then it's our loss. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is today's reader consumes information like this. if it's not seen here in one quick screen, then essentially we have lost him. We can keep on ranting about, 1,000-word essay. Nobody has the time anymore. So how do we re-engineer ourselves as writers to make the writing palatable and interesting is something. By the way, it's not that I'm saying something new. Even in conventional management literature, and I'm sure all my colleagues will agree, the use of case studies to bring stories, make it vivid in front of people, the whole storytelling thing is intended to do exactly that, to spice up, for example, dry financial data, right? To spice up dry organizational decisions and discussions and so on. So that is.
Lost him.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I guess we. Hello.
Yes. Please. Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Mr. Murthy, we can hear you.
I think there's an internet issue.
Yeah, it's an internet issue. So should we pass another question to Mr. Dasgupta? Yeah, I just wanted to know, this probably would be the last question. Hello, would you like to say, Mr. Murthy? Mr. Murthy? Okay.
Please continue. That's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Is it necessary to have a fictional narrative with a factual or autobiographical grounding to make the literary piece appealing, and yet keeping the facts intact? Is it necessary to have a fictional narrative with a factual grounding to make the literary piece appealing?
Who is that question to? Is that to Mr.
Mr. Dasgupta. Mr. Dasgupta.
To me. I can't actually think of an example of that, so I'll pass. I'm sure everything and anything is possible when you're writing, provided you have something to say, and then decide how you're going to say it.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else you would like to say on this particular thing? One line.
Yeah, I would like to say. Yeah, I would like to say one line. I think the work in writing non-fiction is cut out for you. It is one of the most difficult genres to publish and to promote. So whatever techniques you are using, better make it interesting and make it interesting for the reader. Otherwise, I'm afraid the book is going to bomb in the market.
No, and yet keep the facts intact. It should be appealing with the facts intact.
Of course. You cannot write the facts.
You can't distort facts. I mean, facts are facts. And, as I think Murti and Iyer and everyone said, you use the fact as part of storytelling. But, you don't distort what's happened. You may have a different way of interpreting what's happened.
Okay. Anything else you would like to say, or should I conclude? Anything important you would like to say?
Oh, that is a great pleasure to have been here. So I'd like to say it's a great pleasure to have been here. Thank you so much, and to make new friends.
Okay.
Likewise, it was fun. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
I would like to conclude with a line from V.S. Naipaul. It is the only noble calling. It is noble because it deals with the truth. You have to look for ways of dealing with your experience. You have to understand it, and you have to understand the world. Writing is a constant striving after a deeper understanding. That is pretty noble. Thank you, viewers. Thanks to the eminent authors for this valuable panel discussion. Thanks all of you. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.